Good evening, everybody. So I hope you all had a rather productive Monday thus far. As you can tell here in Germany, it is Whitsun or Pentecost Monday, or known in German as Pfingstmontag. So basically, yesterday, it's a very special Pentecostal holiday here in Germany. Hey Tony, how you been? And yeah, things have been rather busy as of late. So I know I should have said this like a couple of weeks ago, but I really want to thank everybody who greeted me for my 32nd birthday. And it was still quite incredible and humbling to know that I still had a fair number of greetings even days after my birthday. And well, to everybody who managed to greet me a belated happy birthday, thank you all so much. It's been a very wonderful birthday celebration I've had with you guys, whether you're my family members or my fans or friends or fellow online content creators. You know who you are, and I am thoroughly grateful for everything that you've done thus far and all the wonderful words, all the kind words and the encouraging words that you've been giving me on my very special day. So, yeah, I am just completely over the moon, and I thank you all so much. And well, in terms of my academic lifestyle, I have been catching up with my master's thesis. I'm currently on my 24th page. I'll be approaching my 25th. And in my university, you have to write a total of, well, at least for the main content, 60 pages. Now, that doesn't really include the cover page and the table of contents, the bibliography, and the declaration of authorship. And there's also a 10% rule. So I had a talk with my first supervisor, and well, they said that I have to write between, well, since it's 60 pages, I could write a minimum of 54 and a maximum of 66. Well, pages of main content. So it's been quite a very intriguing ride thus far. And well, as I said, it's been exciting. I've managed to learn a lot from the topic that I chose for my master's thesis, and it's just incredible what I managed to learn from this period of time. By the way, Tony, how have you been, man? I'm pretty sure that you've been busy yourself. I'm pretty sure that a lot of things have been going on. So, hey, this is what the stream is for, to catch up with all you guys. And whatever questions you have, I'm an open book. So you could fire away at any moment now. I'm totally interested in hearing them. So let it all commence. Another thing is that the main topic of my MA thesis revolves around the Fresh Prince of Bel Air. And I'm mainly focusing on the fatherhood aspect, as in focusing on like the fathers of the show. Hey, Pete. Yeah, I've been doing well. I've been very busy. It's been kind of crazy as of late and very productive, mind you. Um Hey, goddess. So how have you been? How have you all been? I'm sure that you've all been doing okay. And in any case, while my main topic is like fatherhood and the television representation of Black American fatherhood on Fresh Prince of Bel Air, I've also seemed to realize that there were other assets or aspects about the show that kind of made it the way it was. And I've realized that it wasn't just about fatherhood, it also, well, there's a lot going on with, the eras of sitcoms. And based on a piece of research that I had from this author slash scholar known as Robin R. Means Coleman, she basically pegged the 1990s as in the decade of the Fresh Prince of Bel Air in the neo minstrelsy era. As she argued, she stated that the 1990s were basically full of, well, stereotypes that were originally from the original minstrelsy era of the 1950s, well, more specifically 1950 to 1953. And they found themselves returning in the 1990s. And she had a very harsh opinion about the neo minstrelsy era as opposed to the Cosby era of 1984 to 1989. And while I did understand where she was coming from because the characters in the neo minstrelsy era did a lot more dancing and there was a lot more hip hop, R&B and rap involved, especially in terms of the music presented as well as the AAVE speech. Hey Ty, how you been? Well, going back to that, it's also made me realize, especially in terms of researching, especially with the 1990s, especially for Black sitcoms, Black American sitcoms, that it also touched on more pressing themes, like what happened back between 1991 and 1992 with this whole, you know, horrible um, atrocity that happened against Rodney King, and he was beaten by four white police officers. And if that were not bad enough, the four police officers were basically acquitted after serving some time, and this caused like the 1992 LA riots. So with that piece of contentious history that happened, well, especially in American history, it's kind of no wonder why, at least how I perceive it, 1990s Black sitcoms in the US were not shying away from the racial tensions or touching on the racial tensions and the socioeconomic tensions that occurred, especially within the Black community. It really is something once you start opening your eyes and mind to a lot of this history that happened in the 1990s. And considering that I was born in 1992, it really does say a lot. And it does make me feel a little bit more sensitized to what was going on at the time, but also made me realize that, well, those who failed to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Wow, that's really great, Ty. I'm glad that you're doing very well with yourself. As you can tell, Ty, I have been madly busy, both with Inu Aya month that happened, you know, last month in April, and Here's the funny thing. I was about to complete a piece of work for Inu Aya month. I just want to see if I still have it. Ah, here it is. It's still work in progress, as you could clearly see. I managed to complete the outlines for last month's Inu Aya month. Yeah, as you could really tell, I have been a huge fan of Inu Aya ever since I was a teenager. Um, if you guys know me, I have been a huge Inu Aya partisan ever since I was a lot younger, and I know that there are going to be those people appearing in the chat and in the comment section saying that, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Inu Keek and Inu Kag are canon and Kog Aya is canon. I am not going to have any of your crap on here, please. But going back to my experience with Inu Aya, I've always kind of admired this couple. I was also intrigued to know just how rare this couple is. I've only seen a few niche shippers of that particular couple, only on fanfiction.net. And it really took time for me to kind of try to find my footing with it. In fact, I did not start drawing Inu Aya fan art until I was approaching 26. So it was around the time that I was starting to become a little bit more confident in releasing drawings or fan art on DeviantArt because I wasn't so sure if I was going to trust myself with that. By the way, thanks, Miss Kitty. Yeah, um, Rugrats, in terms of that episode, Chucky's Wonderful Life, it's been a very interesting and touching episode to me because I think Chucky in his Rugrats years was a character I also enjoyed ever since I was a lot younger. Sure, I like Tommy a lot more, but I think Chucky being Tommy's best friend slash brother from another mother really does complete Tommy in a way that he doesn't feel like the second fiddle, but he is someone who does complete him. And that's something that I've continued to cherish when it comes to Chucky's and Tommy's friendship. It's really fantastic. And it really says something that Chucky's Wonderful Life does contextualize that Tommy without Chucky would not have stood up to Angelica. And that really does say something of how frightening that episode was. On top of that, um, I had a theme going on back in 2020. Well, more specifically, Christmas and New Year's 2020. I had to pretty much look at three episodes from the 90s to the early 2000s that touched on or basically were homages to It's a Wonderful Life. And I still despise the Fairly Odd Parents, It's a Wishful Life. I caught that piece of shit back when I was 13 and I despised it. Yeah, I caught it back when I was a 13-year-old staying with a host family in Oxford, or more specifically in Abingdon, because where I was staying in Abingdon was a bus ride away from the main Oxford city. So catching that particular episode in England, of all places, sort of brought back some really triggering memories from when I was a 13-year-old about to approach the seventh grade. And, well, I could still say with confidence that It's a Wishful Life is one of my most hated episodes in all of Nickelodeon history. And it's something that I still despise to this day. And I think it kind of also makes me realize that um, just the contention I have with Butch Hartman as an artist and as a an overall content creator for television. Okay, would I attend Camp Half Blood from Percy Jackson or Anything Goes Martial Arts from One Half? Well, I want to go with Anything Goes Martial Arts from Rama One Half, but I would say neither. Goddess, so I would say neither. If I wanted to attend something in terms of martial arts, I would probably stick with just training under um, Goken. I would really just endeavor to train myself or to train with Goken from Street Fighter, the same instructor slash surrogate father for Ryu and Ken, as I said, from Street Fighter. But if I wanted to go the extra route, I wouldn't mind being under Akuma's wing at all. Yes, I know that Akuma is the villain or one of the villains, but I can't deny just how formidable he really is as a martial artist, even though he is very bloodthirsty. But still, he's epic in his own way. Yeah, I mean, that's really great, Ty. Just really continue doing what you're doing and you'll definitely make a lot of great things. And I know that I've also been very busy with a lot of academic work, especially with this master's thesis. I mean, mind you, writing between 54 pages at the very minimum, 60 pages as the standard, and even 66 pages or even 66 pages as the maximum is easier said than done, especially when you have to make sure that your arguments and your, well, what you want to state from the research and the sources that you've managed to acquire to make sure that all of your arguments stick together, it's all easier said than done. By the way, thanks so much, Tony. That actually took me, well, a couple of hours to complete. Well, at least the outline. I intend to do the coloring a little bit later, but as of right now, I want to make sure that I go a little bit further with my master's thesis by this month because my due date is in late August, and I gotta make sure that I end up meeting that due date or even like submit it before the due date with all the bells and whistles being polished. Well, let's see. Another what if the Street Fighter characters raise and train the DC superhero girls? You know, that would be quite interesting, but well, it really depends on which characters would be suitable mentors for um, the main DC superhero girls because I could see Chun Li, Cammy, and Sakura being really good mentors to these girls. The same story can be said about Rose and Karin, Elena, and Nanase and Hokuto. Actually, if I were to pick really good mentors for the main DC superhero girls, they would have to be Chun Li, Hokuto, Sakura, Cammy, Elena, Rose, and Karin. Yeah, yeah. That's that's very promising. It's It's very promising, Ty, because yeah, we I do really miss the good old days of what Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, Nickelodeon used to be. Well, Miss Kitty, I have been considering Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost for quite some time. I would say that the same case needs to go for Scooby Doo and the Cyber Chase, but hopefully, whether it's in September or October, I will have, or I really do hope to review Scooby Doo on Zombie Island and Scooby Doo and the Witch's Ghost because those two were the ones that I've appreciated the most. And of course, I still argue, and I'll always argue, that Mary Kay Bergman is one of my favorite voice actresses for Daphne, and she will be missed. Yeah, I could definitely see Ken Masters be akin to a surrogate father to Barbara Gordon. I think they would click very well, Goddess. So I do agree. I really feel that Junebug films can have the potential to like harken back to the good old days of Disney, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network. At least with Me TV these days, it seems to really draw in viewers who are very nostalgic of the good old days of television. Yeah. Um, but speaking of which, I do kind of miss the golden ages of the 80s and the 90s. Well, especially in my case when it comes to the 90s, because there was a lot of really good animated and live action content no matter where you went, whether it's on the big three like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, or Disney Channel, or even like Fox Kids, or anything in syndication. Yeah, those were definitely the days. Very interesting. Yeah, I think Guile could also be a good foster dad to Karen Beecher or Bumblebee and Dalsim. That would be very interesting to have him as a mentor to Diana Prince or Wonder Girl from DC Superhero Girls. That'd be very interesting. You know, I've also kind of had this um concept in my Splendid Seven AU headcanon where Sashomaru, Shuran, Inuyasha, Hakako, Ginta, Ayame, and Shunran specialize in a whole deal of martial arts. And as I stated before, Sashomaru mainly specializes in mixed martial arts with a background in Vale Tudo, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and Luta Livre, and even Japanese Jiu Jitsu, but especially Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, because I do see Sashomaru specializing or even having a background in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu to back him up well in mixed martial arts. And Shuran being the pro wrestler who specializes in not only American and British pro wrestling, but also Mongolian wrestling and sumo wrestling. Inuyasha, it would be the wrestler slash bodybuilder who specializes in ancient Greek wrestling, pankration, and combat sambo and capoeira lua, but most especially a combination of ancient Greek wrestling and pankration. Because I could definitely see Inuyasha master all of those grappling techniques or even a lot of the wrestling techniques because that's definitely his forte, at least in my AU headcanon. Hakaku, Muay Boran being the predecessor of Muay Thai, and except that it also uses the head aside from the elbows, the knees, the fists, and the feet, and the shins. And Ginta with Lethway, which is akin to Muay Boran, and it also uses the head just like Muay Boran, but it's also based in Burma or Myanmar. Yeah, it's also based in Myanmar. Ayame, she would specialize in Muay Thai, especially with a background in Korean kickboxing or Kyuktuki and Dutch kickboxing, as well as Muay Lao. But more than anything, Muay Thai is definitely going to be her main fighting style because of how quick and how forceful she can be with her, not only her fists and feet but also her elbows, her knees, and her shins. So she definitely has those limbs to her advantage. And Shunran, well, Shaolin Kung Fu, given the fact that she is a flower based Panther Deva, I could definitely tell that her grace and how quick she can be, especially in canon, could also be used for her skills, at least in my AU head canon for Shaolin Kung Fu, because there's something rather flowing about her movements as well as her style, at least how I perceive it. So, in terms of like ideal mentors I have for Sesshomaru, Shuran, Inuyasha, Hakaku, Ginta, Ayame, and Shunran. With Sesshomaru, it's a little bit of a toss up between Ryu and Ken from Street Fighter and um, Kazuya and Paul from Tekken. Yeah, that is just how much of a toss up it is. For Shuran, it's a little bit more clear cut. He would end up having, but excuse me, going back to Sashomaru, I think he would really end up having um, Ryu and Ken as his mentors. And for Shuran, he would have E Honda and Hugo as his mentors. Inuyasha, he is gonna have Zangief and Guile. And for for Hakaku, he's gonna have Sagat and Dalsim as his mentors. Um, Ginta, yeah, Ginta, he's gonna have Adon and DJ as his mentors. And finally, we have Ayame having both Joe Higashi and Benimaru Nikaido as her mentors. And then for Shunran, I would say yeah, the two twins from Street Fighter, Yun and Yang. And yeah, excuse me, going back to Sesshomaru, I think he would end up having he would really end up having Kazuya Mishima and Paul Phoenix as his mentors for sure. I could definitely see um, a really great mentorship under them. And as for Shuran, I could actually see him have Ganryu and King as his mentors. Um, I think there are also some kung fu fighters from King of Fighters that I think would be good mentors for Shunran, but that's basically a lot of those that I've had in mind. Yeah, I could totally understand that tie. There's already writing for Snow White. It's still gonna take me a little bit of time to kind of give you the design figures I have in mind because like I said, academic work and all that. And by the way, Tony, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, definitely. Apple cinnamon pie is delicious. It's quite lovely, but you know, key lime pie, if you want something decadent, that definitely hits the spot. Yeah. Yeah, Mel Masters and Barbara Gordon. That'd be absolutely interesting. But if you ask me, I was never a huge partisan, let alone a huge fan of Ken Masters and Eliza as a couple. Maybe it's just my own bias because, well, growing up, I wasn't really into the whole love story that Ken Masters had with Eliza. Eliza, I know that she has some spirit and spunk, but to me, she was kind of there. And I know that she's hot, she's gorgeous, and she's absolutely quite the looker. But to me, at least in my opinion, and I know that there's going to be a whole bunch of Canon fans saying, "What are you talking about? Ken Eliza's canon. You don't know what you're talking about." But forget him. You know, it's kind of the shipper and me perceiving Ken and Kemi being a lot more compatible because I've always believed in the concept of two characters challenging each other to be the best versions of themselves. And I could definitely see that with Ken and Cammy, at least in an AU setting. I think it's also because with Ken being this dashing and virile fighter dude with a whole bunch of masculine charm and Cammy being all kick ass and formidable in her own special way, I could definitely see those two working out well as a couple. And it is an enjoyable thought. And I would also like to think that Mel Masters could have easily ended up being Ken's and Cammy's son. Just my hot take on the matter. Yeah, I'm fully aware of the I Was a Teenage Gary episode. I never really understood why certain people didn't like this particular episode at all. I never really understood the backlash of it. I thought it was a pretty fun episode. I thought it was fun in its own merit. And yeah, it would be interesting to see Barbara Gordon or Batgirl and Mel Masters be siblings. It'd be really cool and sweet. Yeah. Yeah, that's totally cool with me, Goddess. So there you go. I've pretty much also stated that the thing about, me and kind of going against the grain when it comes to canon and fanon really does say a lot because I was really never into the whole, you know, relationship with Ken Masters and Eliza because at least to me, Eliza was okay. I mean, I tolerated her. She was quite the looker, but even I believe that she kind of deserves someone a little bit more mature and kind of a little bit more grounded, which is why I think that she could end up having a better future with Charlie Nash. That would actually be a lot more, realistic, at least in my opinion. Whereas with Ken and Cammy, I think they could actually make something great with each other. The same thing I can say about Ryu and Chun Li. I think with my whole perception on Ryu and Chun-Li, I've always shipped this couple ever since I was a very young boy who was into Street Fighter at the time, especially in the arcade. I really, really loved, Ryu and Chun Li together. Yeah, Ryu and Chun Li was definitely my OTP for life. Same thing I could say about Ken and Cammy. So Ryu, Chun Li, and Ken and Cammy were my two one true pairings of all time ever since I was a child, which really says a lot because when you have a couple that you have been shipping ever since you were about 6 or 5 years old and still love them to this day, and you still find a lot of reasons why you still love them, it really does say a lot of how strong their staying power really is. So there's no way that I'm ever going to end up being separated from these couples. The same thing I can say about Inuyasha and Ayame because, well, with Inuyasha and Ayame, it's just me when I say that I don't particularly care about the Takahashi couples at all. I know that they do have quite the fan base, but here's also my take. I kind of find a good amount of the fan base rather, toxic. And if you disagree with them or if you don't like Kagome, oh boy, they can be absolutely ruthless and call you a lot of mean things and just make you feel like a piece of crap for your beliefs. I have a whole bunch of fantards and fan brats on Twitter just being all toxic and pathetic. And just looking at them, I think they were just projecting their own pathetic insecurities onto me because at least I had a brain. And at least I've learned to think a lot more critically about why I despise Inuyasha and Kagome together and why I still despise Kagome to this day. I don't care if TV Tropes marks her as Ron the Death Eater. I still think that what Kagome has been doing toward Inuyasha was completely unacceptable. The same thing I could say about a good number of Rumiko Takahashi's female protagonists. And you really wonder why works such as Rama One Half and Inuyasha don't hold up so well in stark comparison to Yu Yu Hakusho. In fact, I remember watching Animax when I was a teenager in the Philippines. I was way more excited for watching Yu Yu Hakusho than I ever was excited watching Ranma. That really does say a lot as to which anime series, or let alone old school anime series, I preferred a lot more. Because the thing about Yu Yu Hakusho is that the characters grow. Even after over 100 episodes, they continue to grow, they continue to mature, and they continue to exhibit a lot more strength as fighters and as people in their own special ways. And there's a lot more to write home about the four main protagonists of Yusuke, Kuwabara, Kurama, and Hiei. And these are the four main heroes that I will always, always cherish because it really does say a lot when you have these four who actually grow to be a lot more nuanced than what they used to be. Although with Hiei, his growth is a little bit more subtle. Yes, and he still maintains that whole stone cold and hardened edge that he's been maintaining throughout the series. And at least that's also something I continue to admire about him. Heck, the funny thing about me and Yu Yu Hakusho is I also have two of my favorite couples that I ship very loyally. I am a hardcore Kuwabara Kurama and Yusuke Hiei shipper, especially where Yusuke Hiei is concerned. Now, I never really thought about Yusuke and Hiei being shipped as a couple until I was about 14 years old. Maybe it's just because of their hot blooded intensity that just made me think, yeah, these two could actually work well with each other. I know that Yusuke is technically with Keiko and Canon, but I guess it's sort of the slash fan in me that prefers Yusuke and Hiei as a couple. I think it's because of this. I also feel that Yusuke could bring out the best in Hiei in terms of finding a fiercely loyal side to him, as well as a side that can actually show a little bit of warmth and intimacy, especially when the curtains and doors are closed. And with Hiei, I could see him challenging Yusuke to be a lot more than what he thinks he is. And it's all about dynamics, healthy relationship dynamics that can actually see both of them grow and thrive in their own special way. I also see them as a sort of dark yet mysterious couple in a sort of gothic sense, but also something that makes them very formidable and powerful, both physically and psychologically. In fact, when I was 14, I kind of thought that the whole concept of Yusuke and Hiei being paired as a couple seemed rather interesting. And that was when I was still like perusing DeviantArt ostensibly as an outsider because I never really thought about having my own DeviantArt account back when I was a 14-year-old, because back then at 14, all I was more concerned about was researching stuff on the internet and even like having my first encounter with YouTube, as I said, ostensibly as an outsider. And those days as a teenager were quite interesting because I was able to kind of also watch clips from shows that were also old at the time and that were also recorded, that also ended up being on YouTube before all the copyright stuff ended up happening. So those were very good times. Yeah, I do agree with you, Miss Katie. Well, especially like the first Rugrats movie, although the first one was okay. The second one, Rugrats in Paris, was actually the best, but Rugrats Go Wild, it was crummy. I'm sorry to say this, but Rugrats Go Wild was absolutely crummy, which kind of says something about the year 2003 because, well, in my opinion, 2003 wasn't a particularly great year for films. At least there was the likes of Seabiscuit, there was the final Lord of the Rings movie, and, well, yeah, Tokyo Godfathers. I could never forget about Tokyo Godfathers, which I was also intrigued to know that there was a new English dub, not the Animex English dub, but an English dub that also used American actors, well, American voice actors. Yes, I cannot forget about Finding Nemo. That was one of the best films of 2003. Although I will say this about 2003, though. 2003 was a very damn good year for television animation, especially where anime was concerned. Well, think about it from when you were watching television back in 2003. You had Teen Titans grace the screen on Cartoon Network. You had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2003 gracing the Fox box. And I do agree with Fabio and with a good number of people who caught TMNT 2003. That was the best incarnation of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ever. And yes, I know that there will be some nostalgic fans hearts who say, "What are you talking about? TMNT 1987 was the best." Well, TMNT 1987 might have introduced the world to, well, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in television animation. But mind you, as Fabio said on his previous videos, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics were darker and grittier. The thing about the 1987 version, it still had its moments, mind you, and there were still a lot of emotionally charged and emotionally deep moments that were occurring in the 1987 cartoon. But there were times that it still felt like it's, well, colorful and bouncy animated series. And I will say this, TMNT 1987 was still fun, but well, with TMNT 2003, it was still amazing in its own standards, especially with its engaging storylines. Yes, it still has its silly moments here and there, which is kind of, well, par for the course for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon adaptations. But other than that, TMNT 2003 was still, at least in my opinion, the best animated television incarnation of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And of course, even in anime, 2003 was a very damn great year for anime. Wolf's Rain, Technolize, Full Metal Alchemist, Detective School Q, Planetes, Chrono Crusade, and Requiem from Requiem from the Darkness. Those were definitely great anime series from 2003. Well, Axel Blade, I did catch a couple of early Star Wars films, and the ones that I did catch a little bit more often were the films starring Natalie Portman as Padme Amidala and Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker. I've been rather up and down with Star Wars, and I do not really consider myself a very hardcore fan of the franchise, but it has its charm. There are things about it that I still enjoy to this day. I still enjoy the space opera elements to be found in there. I still enjoy how much a good portion of these films introduced me to the concept of the hero's journey. And there were definitely some things about Star Wars that made me thoroughly engaged as a viewer. I still can't get over how Jake T. Lloyd was, well, unfortunately harangued and bullied. I still feel so sorry for him because he was a very promising young actor, and I really do pray that he's doing well because how he was treated as a kid and how his reception was during his formative years was just extremely troubling. And that is just not a good sign when you when you have a young kid actor just go through this type of turmoil. It's just sad. Well, I would say that Ken Masters would not get along well with Genma Saotome. I think with the other character, well, with Poseidon, I think he'd get along with him well. Master Splinter, absolutely. I would definitely see Master Splinter getting along well with both Ryu and Ken, bar none. I could see Master Splinter be the firmest of allies with both Ryu and Ken. Absolutely. It just makes a lot of sense. In fact, I could even see Master Splinter being good allies with Yoshimitsu from Tekken and the Soul Calibur series. Well, it wasn't just Star Wars that inspired Outlaw Star, but also Star Trek, and I think a little bit of Treasure Planet, because there's still that young kid character to be found in Jim, aside from the main hero of Gene Starwind. So the space opera elements don't just stop there, like using Star Wars as inspiration for Outlaw Star, but also Star Trek. So there's a lot to work off of in terms of the Western influences in anime, especially anime from the 1990s to the early 2000s, especially when it comes to anime series like Cowboy Bebop and Trigun. Oh boy, yeah. I mean, I could see why people still love Cowboy Bebop and continue to sing its praises to this day, even though there are some people who think that it's quite um overrated. Because the thing about Cowboy Bebop that I'll always admire and just so adored is because of its writing. It's tight and stellar writing in Cowboy Bebop. It's well-rounded characters that you could actually empathize with and understand, and the dimensions that you like peel from them that make you see who these characters are in their core. There's a lot of case studies to be made about Cowboy Bebop being a quintessential anime series to watch. And I know that everybody and their grandmother and grandfather watched and reviewed Cowboy Bebop. And I still definitely want to take it upon myself to review Cowboy Bebop because it's an anime that I still love to this day, and an anime that I argue is quintessential viewing for any true anime fan. Yes, I know that Sailor Moon introduced a whole generation of girls to anime, and Dragon Ball Z made a lot of prepubescent boys jump around their couches to see the next move. And yes, I do understand that kids growing up in Europe got into the Heidi anime as well as a whole bunch of anime from the Nippon Animation Studios, and let's also not forget about Pokemon's and Digimon's popularity when it comes to toy sales. But you cannot deny the staying power that Cowboy Bebop has, especially after all these years. It also has the best English dub. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are those people who are not fan of dubs or who are not fans of dubs who argued that when it comes to anime dubs that they'll end up watching, let alone rewatching, Cowboy Bebop sits on top. Yeah, it is sad what happened to Jake Lloyd, especially behind the scenes on Star Wars. And it was very unfortunate. The backlash that he ended up receiving because of his character, let alone his performance, is just really sad. The same thing about the backlash against Jar Jar Binks being a very annoying character. Yep. The fan base can be rather ugly when it comes to franchises like Star Wars. Well, Miss Kitty, when it comes to Shark Tale, I didn't like it when I was a 12-year-old. I never liked Shark Tale at all. I thought it was pandering and stupid. Not to mention, its writing was completely Eh, just annoying. The characters were annoying. They were all shallow. And I know that it was trying to kind of, you know, trying to be a little bit more akin to Finding Nemo in the sense that the fish are the main characters, let alone the marine life are like the main characters. But what makes Shark Tale fail so badly is that I could barely care about these characters. I did not care for Oscar. I didn't care for Lenny. I didn't care about what message this film tried to shoehorn in. I didn't care about them at all. I thought that Oscar was a selfish douchebag and a jerk all throughout, and he just didn't really strike me as a compelling hero. As for Finding Nemo, you know what made Finding Nemo win in my eyes? Its heart. And I still appreciate that film to this very day. Well, live action anime. I'm very much on the fence with live action anime, Axel Blade. Well, the reason why anime works as purely animation is as a medium is because you could get away with anything with the medium. Yes, I know that anime is expensive to create, let alone to produce, because you also have to deal with, especially if the anime is adapted from a manga, you have to deal with tight schedules and trying to follow the manga story. And if you find yourself being behind schedule with the manga, yes, of course, fillers are going to happen, which will either be at the story's favor, let alone enhance the story or degrade it. Look at what happened to Rurouni Kenshin back in 1996. My goodness, it was going through a lot of production hell even before it wrapped up. It kind of had a very tough history, and the less said about its creator, the better. But it's safe to say that it seems like the recent 2023 anime adaptation of Rurouni Kenshin seems to rectify a lot of those wrongs. However, I will say this about the OVAs and the movies. The OVAs and the movies actually did justice to the Rurouni Kenshin manga. And as for Full Metal Alchemist, well, the thing about Full Metal Alchemist, let alone anime akin to Full Metal Alchemist, is that the world building is very expansive and exciting. So trying to have it be adapted into anime like live action is a little bit sticky in my opinion. It's a little bit contentious. Well, Barbara Gordon and Eliza Masters, I never really thought of them together, Goddess. So I never really thought of them together, but they would have a nice bond together. But even with live action anime with the original creator in charge, it could go both ways. But there are those particular creators who really want to let their work stay in the realms of animation. And I could definitely see why. Because with anime, you can definitely get away with a lot more world building as well as visual movements, as I like to call it. And you could definitely get away with a lot more interesting character designs depending on what piece you want to do, let alone what you really want to focus on. So that really does kind of depend, because with live action anime with the original creator in charge, well, I don't know really. It's a very sticky situation. Well, I would say that Percy Jackson would win. Dr. Seuss still has their charm because, well, they do have cleverness on their side and they do have resourcefulness as well. But when it comes to the complete package, Percy Jackson's cast would win. Rama one half, well, given my very contentious opinions about Rumiko Takahashi, let alone difficult opinions about her, I don't think a good number of her characters will end up winning. I think Percy Jackson's characters will end up winning bar none. Because the thing I've managed to gather from Percy Jackson is that a good number of the characters at least have some level of pragmatism and not just using their gut instincts or using the whole might is right concept. And although I could still subscribe to that whole might is right concept in anime, there are times that if you look at them a lot more critically or at that principle a lot more critically, you kind of start to realize that the whole might is right concept is just going to fail at worst. Because, well, when you think about it, you're not always going to rely on your own strength or super strength to beat up the bad guys or defeat your opponents or defeat your enemies. You also have to think about having tact as well as a reason why you want to keep fighting. If it's to protect someone that you care about and who genuinely cares for you, good. And don't give me that ham-fisted reminder about Inuyasha saying that, yeah, he cares about Kagome and she cares about him, but what is it with Kagome constantly sitting him and this whole stupid guilt tripping shit that he has to deal with Kikyo being resurrected? That's why I could barely take Inuyasha's canon story seriously because the soap opera elements just make this show just die for me. That is just how I feel about a lot of the soap opera elements in Inuyasha. And that's why I never was a partisan for either Inukag or Inukik because let's face it, neither Kagome nor Kikyo were good for Inuyasha. Kagome seems to bring out the worst in him, whereas with Kikyo, she just wanted to kind of use Inuyasha to become a regular human woman. But my take is this: I think Suikotsu would make a better life partner for Kikyo because at least with Suikotsu and Kikyo, they are at least both emotionally mature, although their lives are riddled with tragedy and anguish. And I would even go out of my way and say that a doctor pairing up with a shrine maiden is actually a good formula for matrimonial happiness, especially when you have the war orphans come into the mix, as well as Kocho and Asuka. Definitely great intimate success for Suikotsu and Kikyo. However, with Kagome, I stopped caring about her. You know, there was a time where I did try to like her and tried to find a sort of potential for her character. I thought she'd be more tolerable if she were Sashomaru's mate and, well, as well as an adoptive mother for Rin and Shippo. But that was when I was still an impressionable teenager, thinking that I could still find something redeemable for Kagome, let alone for Sashomaru. I also tried to kind of see which mate would be nice for Sashomaru, whether it be with Toran or Kikyo or Kagome or even Kagra. But I realized, I think he'd be better off as a single dad. He'd be better off as a single dad and just really root for Inuyasha and Ayame to be together. And I always perceived Sashomaru to be the shipper on deck for Inuyasha and Ayame. Definitely. Definitely a surefire way for Inuyasha and Ayame to finally get together. And of course, for Sashomaru to bless the happy couple, or shall I say, the happy power couple. Ah, Axel Blade, a rewrite of Inuyasha. That's very interesting. And I really do thank you so much that you use me for inspiration for what you want to place your direction with your version of Inuyasha with. That's totally great. Well, in my AU headcanon, Inuyasha is a full yokai. He's a full dog yokai, just like his big brother Sesshomaru. Yes, as you can tell from the fan art, he still has his trademark ears. Although, yes, I know it would have been more reasonable if he had the same ears as Sesshomaru, but I still decide to keep the ears from the anime because it still makes him a little bit more um, distinct. I know that not a lot of people care about those said ears more critically, but as for me, they kind of still have its place. And the reason why the reason why I let Inuyasha be a full-on dog yokai is because I think he'd also be on par with Sesshomaru, and they would both have their own dog yokai forms. And it is also kind of fun to have two dog yokai brothers in Sesshomaru and Inuyasha, two Panther Devas in Shuran and Shunran, and three Wolf Yokai in Hakaku Ginta Nayame. The catch that I had with Shuran is that I decided to make him Hakaku's and Ginta's older brother because how Hakaku and Ginta were treated in the anime was a total shame and a sham. I really still feel sad for both Hakaku and Ginta that they were basically nothing more than Koga's two yes men slash wingmen because they deserved a lot more than that. I kind of do see Hakaku and Ginta having a strong brotherhood with Shuran and a very firm friendship with Inuyasha. And of course, kind of looking up to Sesshomaru as a sort of big brother mentor. But more than anything, I think they would have a stronger bond with Shuran as their big brother and Inuyasha as their best friend for life, slash, well, a sort of very supportive brother in law. As for Ayame and Shunran, I see those two auburn haired shi yokai as sisters, not only because they're both red haired and green eyed, but also, I kind of figured that Ayame would be that tomboyish, strong minded, independent big sister figure to Shunran's girlish and feisty and sweet younger sister. I figured that there'd be a lot of synergy between those girls, without a doubt. So there you have it. It's sort of like why I wanted to, you know, go forward with this direction in terms of having Sesshomaru, Shuran, Inuyasha, Hakaku, Ginta, Ayame, and Shunran just band together. And that's also sort of where the idea of these seven martial artists came to be, because they were also based on the times that I would not only play the fighting games like Street Fighter and Tekken and King of Fighters, as well as a bit of Mortal Kombat, but also what I've caught a little bit on television with UFC. I remembered catching Hoist Gracie fighting against someone. I forgot who, but well, that was back in 2000 when I was visiting one of my relatives in San Francisco. And I remember tuning into the television set to watch a bit of what was going on with Hoist Gracie fighting against someone. I did not know who it was, but it was quite exciting at the time. And then I also remembered UFC being quite the talk of the town when I was a high school student, especially in my third year of high school back in 2009, and of course, my fourth year of high school back in 2010. On top of that, even before all that, 2008 also did mark the release of Never Back Down, which was also one of the films that put mixed martial arts on the map, even more on the mainstream map. So, and of course, these days, even 2 years ago, when I caught like documentaries and old fight matches from Pride FC and the olden days of UFC, I started to I started to become a lot more engaged with a lot of that content. So that was sort of why I kind of found myself going into that direction for especially for Sesshomaru, Shuran, Inuyasha, Hakaku, Ginta, Ayame, and Shunran. But mind you, it's not just them. I also had a whole host of anime characters that I watched ever since I was a teenager and thought that, yeah, they'd also have their own sets of martial arts and they would also specialize in each and every one of them. So when I was doing a lot of research on them and also integrating a specific style for each of them, I think that's sort of when I was getting into a sort of rhythm. Now, for instance, I kind of also decided to go the, well, what I would call mixed martial boxing route. But I think looking back at it a lot more critically, I would say that, you know, the style that I would have for Baki Hanma from Baki the Grappler, Ryoma Sakamoto from Shura no Toki, um, Takeshi Sendo from Hajime no Ippo, Kichi, aka Kibo Miyazawa from Shoot Fighter Tekken, Alexander Volksongi from Hajime no Ippo, Ichiro Miyata from Hajime no Ippo, and of course Ippo Makunouchi from Hajime no Ippo, is that all seven of these gentlemen will be specializing in what I would call mixed, like a hybrid of mixed martial arts, pankration, and boxing, in which they would be able to use all of that ground and pound and all the olden rules that Pancration has, and of course, all the punches in boxing, and really integrate it in their own. Because if they just use like some sort of mixed martial arts and boxing alone, of course, boxing may be effective for them in their respective, you know, anime series, especially in canon. But the way I would see, Baki, Ryoma, Takeshi, Kibo, Vorg, or Alexander, Ichiro, and Ippo specializing in a hybrid of pankration, boxing, and mixed martial arts would just make them a lot more versatile in their attacks. Okay. Yeah, definitely Axel Blade. That would be a very interesting direction that you can go with what you who you want to introduce me to. I would really love to know more about the Leonard brothers because that would definitely be interesting. I'm starting to think that the Leonard brothers are based on the Bogard brothers from King of Fighters, i.e., Terry Bogard and Andy Bogard. I think that might be the direction you're going with when it comes to them, isn't it? Yeah, definitely do it on DeviantArt, man. I cannot wait to see what you got to offer. The last one standing. Hmm. Ranma, Akane, Tatewaki Kuno, Principal Kuno. I would really go with Percy's team because, like I said, and I'll always use this as my main argument. The thing about Percy Jackson and I think his team is that they at least have some semblance of pragmatism and a semblance of a brain in stark comparison to the characters in Rama One Half. Because what I don't particularly care for about the characters in Rama One Half is that they make impulsive and stupid decisions. And they just seem rather petulant and pathetic, at least in my opinion. I never really also had a lot of fond memories with Rama One Half, although I do remember catching that one film when I was a very young boy, and it was a nice film, like the Neck on Ron film. Yeah, I remember enjoying it when I was younger, before I started to find myself in that deep rabbit hole as to what makes a lot of Rumiko Takahashi's works contentious, let alone difficult to watch. Well, I get where you're coming from, Goddess. So, because I understand that with Principal Kuno, you can't underestimate just how resourceful and strong he is. But even then, I would argue that Hades, with his power and with his pragmatism, I think he's just going to drown him. Yeah, definitely, Axel. That is definitely a great source of inspiration. I cannot wait to see what you have to offer because that would be definitely interesting. And even going back to um a lot of the a lot of the styles I have, especially for my favorite anime characters. Now, if you also go to the likes of Yoshiki Takaishi from Street Fighter Tekken, Mamoru Takamura from Hajime no Ippo, Kuranosuke Takeda from Inuyasha. Who was that? Sume from Wolf's Rain, Mitsuhide Kuroda from Street Fighter Tekken. Who's next? Kisuke from Inuyasha and Shinosuke from Inuyasha. I did make them specialize in a sort of um, wrestling pankration boxing hybrid, especially where boxing is concerned for Mamoru Takamura because he is also a boxer. But I think because of their size and muscularity and overall virility, I could actually see them specialize in a hybrid of wrestling, kapukuya lua, and pankration. That's definitely the direction I have for these seven very strong and virile men. Yeah, I do get your point, Goddess. So I just have a very different opinion about a lot of the characters from Ranma One Half. Now, if you're talking about characters who could actually give the characters from Percy Jackson a lot more of a challenge, I do propose the characters from Yu Yu Hakusho, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and um, what was that? Ah, Fist of the North Star or Hokuto no Ken. I do propose those characters from those particular anime series because there is definitely something vibrant, especially about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, let alone naturally virile, unapologetically virile about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And it's a fun romp. It's definitely a fun, virile, engaging romp. And with Fist of the North Star, well, there are characters that are a lot deeper than you think they are. You might think that with Kenshiro, he is this hulking badass and he's just that. But he cares about Julia or Yuria, his girlfriend, and he has a very strong honor code. Not to mention, he is sort of what happens if you put you know, Bruce Lee on a lot of muscle building programs. That's definitely what you get with Kenshiro from Hokuto no Ken. And I think it's very self-explanatory when it comes to the characters in Yu Yu Hakusho who could actually give the characters in Percy Jackson a run for their money. Well, Sonic X versus TMNT tournament fighters. I think TMNT really will nail this in the bag. It's simple because they have the martial arts styles as well as a whole bunch of formidability going on about them. I'd even say that Leo's courage, Donnie's smarts, Raph's strength, and Mikey's cleverness is going to make them win. There really are the attributes that are going to make them win. And if you add in Casey Jones as a wild card, oh boy, you better look out, man, because he's going to just wail it all out. Absolutely. And April O'Neil is definitely going to have her moments as well. Don't underestimate just how formidable she can be. Yeah. And well, as for another topic that I want to really talk about, which is opera. Now, if you guys know me, you'll also know that I have a very low opinion about Regie Théâtre. I am not really a huge fan of a lot of productions that tend to, stray away from the original libretto and all that, which really does cause for a lot of contention. Some of it can work a bit, but when they stray too far from the original libretto and try to subscribe to a sort of political, let alone identity ideology, it really does become a lot more difficult and much more of a chore to watch. Yeah, I do really feel bad for what happened to Ahmed Best. It really is just a shame what happened. By the way, Rogue Agent Killer Rodan, thanks so much. Definitely. I mean, that's how I also feel about opera and musical theater and even theater. If the traditional production works, if it works, why the hell change it? I just don't get it. That's something that I don't particularly care for when it comes to Regie Theater. I was watching a production of Aida at the Staatsoper unter den Linden, and there's also another production of Aida at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. Now, the thing about the one with Calixto Bieto was that, well, he is no stranger to particularly shocking productions. Well, this one, it was a jumbled mess. It was such a jumbled mess. I practically just couldn't fathom what the hell he was trying to convey with this particular production. The one production of Aida at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, it basically had the characters of Radames, Amneris, and Aida on stage, but the other characters like Ramphis, the king of Egypt, Amunazro, the messenger, and the high priestess, as well as the chorus, they're all offstage voices. And there were times that I was sitting next to a chorus member or a couple of chorus members at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, which can be quite an insane time. But, you know, for what it was worth, it didn't really have the lushness of a traditional production of Aida. But for what it was worth, it did have its fun moments. Let's put it nicely. Oh, yeah. Well, I could definitely see that not all things from the good old days were that hunky dory, especially with censorship. I mean, I could see why there was some issues with the original Godzilla, especially when it came to the censorship of the anti-war messages. But there were also a fair number of propaganda cartoons that popped up in Japan during like the First or Second World War, as far as my memory is concerned. But censorship was quite the hot topic at the time. Not to mention, it was still a huge shame, especially when it comes to Tom and Jerry, that Mammy Two Shoes ended up being written out by 1959 after her final appearance in Push Button Kitty. Because Mammy Two Shoes, at least in my opinion, was the best owner Tom had in Tom and Jerry. She really knew how to maintain a household. She was strong enough on her own terms, and she took crap from nobody. Even when she was scared of Jerry, she was still a very strong minded and a very entertaining character. Not to mention, just listening to Lillian Randolph just sell it as Mammy Two Shoes was an absolute blast, even though I wasn't even born yet. But really looking back, I still I still definitely miss Mammy Two Shoes because like I said, she was the best. She was really the best um character for Tom and from Tom and Jerry. She was really, really the best. If it were not for her, she would not have ended up keeping the house in order. And I think she would not have really maintained a sense of order, especially with what's going on between the cat and mouse duo. And of course, there was the whole hullabaloo of, you know, censors thinking that Mammy Two Shoes was a racist stereotype. Oh my, Mammy Two Shoes was a racist stereotype. I never saw her as a racist stereotype at all. I just saw her as someone who was capable and strong enough on her own and someone who kept the household well and up and running. And the fact that she was the sole human character who managed to keep a tight ship with everything that she did, and not to mention everything that she was talking and saying, she really did win in my eyes. In fact, I actually like Mamie Two Shoes a whole lot more than Little Nancy from Baby Puss. Honestly, Mamie Two Shoes was really the best, you know, supporting character. And I think she was just as much as a main character as Tom and Jerry really were. Well, Donatello, Raphael, Leonardo, and Michelangelo raising Sonic's and Amy's daughter, I think that'd be nice. I think that'd be really nice. But for me, I was never a huge fan of Sonic and Amy together. They might seem cute and sweet together, but to me, it's just vanilla. Absolutely vanilla. There was one friend that I had on DeviantArt who has been very much engaged with my works. And, well, hang on a second. Who was very much engaged with my works, who I actually think was a very who I actually think that was a very interesting direction that he was able to. I don't know if this person was a he or she or a they, but yeah, Racha Cloud. Hang on. Yeah, she definitely like she that she found out about um what I was doing in terms of Inu Aya, and she basically paired Sonic and Tikal, the echidna. So I never really thought of Sonic and Tikal as a couple, but I really do have to thank Racha Cloud for introducing me to that particular couple because she also wrote a fanfic, a crossover fanfic based on the concept that I had for Inuyasha and Ayame as an awesome fighting power couple. So yeah, when she read through a lot of the stuff I had in store for Inuyasha and Ayame, I think she herself was also very inspired by what I wrote and also, had a go at writing her own crossover fanfic. So I kind of found myself being a Sonic and Tikal partisan as much as Ratchet Cloud is. Another couple that actually surprised me in terms of appeal was the pairing between Dudley and Daisy from Tough Puppy. I really do have to thank Ginga 112 for really introducing me to this couple and for giving me a good number of ideas of what to do with this couple because I definitely found the appeal between Dudley and Daisy absolutely intriguing and absolutely nice. Almost like a treat that I ended up acquiring and just having a ball with that said treat. Yeah, I mean, essentially, with censorship becoming way too crazy in this day and age, I mean, come on. We don't even get to see The Cosby Show on Nick at Night anymore because although I do understand the contention that happened between a lot of the women that allegedly got violated by Bill Cosby and academics basically treating Bill Cosby as if though he were the bogeyman. It's just kind of not fair that the Cosby Show ended up being booted from Nick at Night in favor of Friends reruns on Nick at Night. Are you kidding me? Friends isn't even that good of a show, at least in my opinion. If I wanted shows better than Friends, I'd rather stick to Frasier, Cheers, Seinfeld, The Fresh Prince of Bel Air, The Jeffersons, The Cosby Show, and Different Strokes. Oh, yes, and even One Day at a Time, Murphy Brown, and Golden Girls. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a shame that that happened, and it seems like every time Bill Cosby's name is brought up, even in spite of the pro-social messages that he has instilled in his shows like Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids and um and the Cosby Show, it seems like academics these days have basically treated Bill Cosby as if though that he were the scary bogeyman, which is just not fair. But then again, sometimes you'll have to find a way to separate the art from the artist. I mean, it's no surprise that there are artists who were not particularly good people, but then people still choose to remember their works. And I think it's also about the concept of Roland Barthes, the death of the author. Like, I could still love The Cosby Show. I could still love Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. And I could still go out of my way and say that Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, you know, that particular show is a definite must watch for any kid, especially today. I would even go out my way and say that I would rather have Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids being aired instead of that Coco Melon crap. I would rather have Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids being aired for our generation of children and teenagers because they deserve to have good animation. Well, Tony, the thing about Friends is at best I tolerate it, but at worst I don't particularly care for it. I think what really made my enjoyment of Friends kind of drown is that there were times that the characters acted kind of stupidly, and not to mention the whole Ross and Rachel um debacle. I mean, seriously, can't these two just finally admit their feelings and consummate their feelings and then just get over it? Jeez. It's okay, Tony. I know that, my opinions about Friends kind of changed because I think when I started to look at the show a little bit more critically, I never really understood why on earth was it like considered one of the best when there are actually more sharply written shows out there. I mean, let's face it, Seinfeld, it kind of makes Friends, Seinfeld, it makes Friends seem a lot more like the Care Bears because Seinfeld has way sharper writing, way cleverer characters, and plots that I actually gave a crap about. And there were also a lot of characters in Seinfeld, not to mention the brand of comedy that also kind of comes from an earnest place. And with shows like The Cosby Show and A Different World, well, with The Cosby Show, you can criticize The Cosby Show for having the Huxtable family being almost, too good to be true because, well, I could see why there are those academics and scholars who like criticize the Huxtables because the thing about what I've also argued with my presentation on the Huxtables racialized space in a brownstone neighborhood in New York is that yes, the show may star a black American family who've managed to achieve upward social mobility. Yes, it may star a Black American family who is, well, upper middle class, especially with Cliff being a doctor, specifically an obstetrician and gynecologist, and Claire being a high flying attorney and even having 5 kids who are all clever and well-rounded in their own special ways. I mean, Sandra is a college student attending Princeton. Denise is a high school student who is bright and smart, but really more of a free spirit. Theo starts off as someone who is disinterested in school, but eventually finds his direction in education once he gets to college and really applies himself. Vanessa, she herself is clever and she has a very quick mind, but sometimes she does get herself into sticky situations. And then you got Rudy, who starts off as precocious and wide eyed, but also grows into a more strong willed teenage girl, let alone teenage girl. Now, while it is very empowering to see the Huxtable family be this image of a Black American family who've achieved upward social mobility and who also debunked a lot of Daniel Patrick Moynihan's claims of the Black American family being dysfunctional and disorganized, it kind of also shows that once you start taking a look at the Cosby Show a little more critically, you kind of see that, well, the Huxtable family mainly occupy and end up living by predominantly white standards. So they kind of end up being sort of assimilated into that particular way of living. But you could also see that, yes, they may have found that type of elevation, little social elevation, but they also have to kind of abide by all of these white standards of living. And the only remnants of any sort of Black American identity that is present in the Cosby Show, well, at least are the presence of jazz music and Black American actors and singers and musicians, as well as like talks of certain Black figureheads, especially when it comes to the existence of historically Black colleges and universities. Not to mention, by the time Elvin and Elvin and Sandra ended up married, they even named their children Winnie and Nelson after the Mandelas. And another thing that does make the Huxtables, you know, live by these white standards of living an upper middle class life is also the furniture that they surround themselves with. Yes, there are some paintings that also have some Black people, let alone Black artists on there. But what you also notice about their living room is that it doesn't really like it doesn't really remind you of a typical Black family, because whenever you think of Black families on television, you usually think of Black families who are like not socially upward, and those who are low class at worst, and even those who are only, you know, like only have one child, and or have no children at all, or even have a surrogate child via raising their nephew or niece, or even have the spouse be an absentee father, or the spouse a deceased wife. Like with Stanford and Son, you have a father and son duo who have who ended up losing the matriarch of the family. So now it's those two together. And they're not really from any type of money whatsoever. But with the Cosby Show, going back to the Cosby Show, it did revolutionize that on paper. But the Huxtable family were still, you know, living in sort of a bubble where they were living by white upper class standards. On top of that, the fact that Cosby didn't want to have any mention of race going on in his show is also indicative of the notion of colorblind casting, let alone colorblind um, hiring, in terms of not being overtly Black, but also maintaining a sense of, or this illusion of unity, or making all the characters exist in this post-racial world. And that's also a similar case with The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Although with The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air as well as Family Matters, both of them are a little bit more upfront about some very important issues that occur within the Black American community. I mean, back in season one of Fresh Prince, and I could definitely understand why there are a lot of comparisons between the Cosby Show and the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, because both the Cosby Show and the Fresh Prince of Bel Air feature affluent African American families who've achieved upward social mobility, while the Huxtables are upper middle class and living in a brownstone in New York. You have the Banks family who are wealthy and live in a mansion in Bel Air, California. And yeah, I do agree with you, Agent Keller O'Dan. There also have been black superheroes, especially when it comes to the likes of Static Shock and John Stewart from Justice League. So at this point, I don't really understand why people are complaining about, the lack of black representation in superhero films. It's kind of ridiculous. You also had your fair share of black superheroes and even like black characters who are also included in the superhero rosters, and even strong black women like Bumblebee and um Vixen and Black Panther. Yeah, absolutely incredible black superheroes also exist. So not all is lost. It's just that you have to dig a little bit deeper and actually do some research, and don't always stick with your feelings, because that's not going to get you anywhere. All right, Rogue Agent. I hope you do take great care of yourself. I want to thank you so much for the very engaging talks, as well as the very engaging comments that you've left me, and not to mention some really nice and warm ones. They were definitely empowering, and they also remind me that I do have a purpose as a content creator. I thank you so much for everything that you've continued to do thus far, Rogue Agent. You are definitely one of the best, and I wish you well, bro. Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, with Black Panther, yeah, as I said, he was also part of that. But with Miles Morales, well, I think I'm just going to stick with the older Spider Man cartoon, as well as the older Spider Man comics. Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Rogue Agent. Well, when it comes to Spider Man cartoon, I mean the one from the 90s. So I do have to catch up on that as well. And speaking of 90s superhero shows, I'd also rather catch up with X-Men the from the 1990s. After all, I do have a couple of favorite muscle hunks there, i.e. Kazar of the Savage Lands and Archon. I do love them to bits. Their bulging muscles and their handsome countenances. I can never have enough of them. Well, I never really grew up with Miles Morales first and foremost. And well, I don't know. Maybe it's just something that kind of screams like an agenda that tries to call in for more diversity, more equity, and all of that. And I'm not really in for this whole woke shit anymore, buddy. It's just that whenever I think of, anybody who has been bitching about, you know, representation and, have not having enough diversity in entertainment, I just can't help but roll my eyes and say, come on, can't you just do your research? But I do understand where Robin Armin's Coleman is coming from with the various periods in which black sitcoms are, you know, assigned in. Like, and then from 1950 to 1953, you have the minstrelsy era, i.e., radio shows and television shows like Amos and Andy, the Beulah Show or Beulah. And well, basically those two come to mind because they show Black American characters in humorous roles and basically making the white characters look more appealing. The non recognition era was a sticky situation for television networks because from 1954 to 1967, well, television was really having a hard time trying to integrate Black characters into more television shows. And the television executives at the time found it really tough to want to integrate them a lot more and just ended up, you know, not having them that much anymore, or not even having them on as like the main focus of their shows from those periods of time. And the assimilationist era was basically the time when Black American characters found themselves being integrated into white spaces and becoming these very submissive, docile characters. And their overall docile nature just kind of shows that they become nothing more than props to the white spaces and almost feels like they have to be the very nurturing characters, which is only like one part of the Black experience. And in terms of the Lear era or the social relevancy era or the Black ridicule era, you at least have Norman Lear, especially with his like flagship show, All in the Family, setting foot and taking off. And from All in the Family success, you have Good Times, Sanford and Son, and The Jeffersons. With The Jeffersons being a spin-off show from All in the Family based on, well, George and Louise, aka Wheezy Jefferson, being the bunker's black neighbors and their counterparts. And while they do feature Black American characters, and while All in the Family tackled a lot of important themes from immigration to racism to classism, the Black characters in those shows, they don't really address the issues going on in their communities. And well, they just they just seem more like, well, seem more like they're not as nuanced as the bunkers were, especially where Archie Bunker is concerned. Now the during 1984 to 1989, that was when the Cosby era came to be, and that was the time when the Cosby Show, A Different World, and Frank's Place aired and showed Black American people in more respective portrayals. And it's not just those three shows that I mentioned that showed them in that more respective life or that more respective light, but also the extremely underrated Snoops from 1989, starring Tim Reed and Daphne Maxwell Reed as Chance and Mickey. And this show, Snoops, that I consider to be very underrated, is a crime comedy about a couple that solve mysteries, which was absolutely amazing in its own special way. And of course, since that this is the Cosby era, what really made the Cosby era special for many viewers at the time was that it's not just showing Black American characters in a more respectable light, but it also showed them, achieving upward social mobility. It showed them, going to college, having more competitive jobs, and of course having kids succeed in wanting to do more for themselves and eventually the people around them. The only thing that could be criticized about the Cosby era was that it seemed too good to be true, and it didn't always touch upon the issues revolving around race and the socioeconomic tensions concerned. But that was mainly for the Cosby Show. A Different World was, well, given its status as a spin-off show, managed to go more in depth with the social issues and the racial issues, as well as the socioeconomic issues revolving around the characters of Hillman, which is the university that Denise found herself in a couple of seasons of A Different World before going back to the Cosby Show. By the way, Jess Saltis, you are banned. Anyway, let's not have that so called troglodyte be in this particular stream to spoil our fun. In any case, going back to the whole Cosby era, yeah, uh, it also did show, and aside from showing Black American characters in a more respectable light, it also showed that Cosby's notion of colorblind casting and colorblind hiring was still in effect even after his tenure on Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. So he was still trying to portray Black American people in a more respectable and beneficial light, even with the Cosby Show not always addressing racism, but also addressing, as what I would have loved to, what I ended up adding into my presentation, also addressing like the gender-based power dynamics, with Claire having as much, you know, parental power, if not more parental power, than Cliff has. And especially how she says in the 49th anniversary episode that she likes to see him beg right now. And she even gives specific commands to Rudy not to wake up um, Cliff's dad, played by Earl Hyman. So there was definitely a lot of gender based plays, let alone power plays, that happened on the Cosby Show. That kind of also showed that it was just as nuanced as it was as a sitcom. And finally, and at least with a different world, it managed to, you know, go up to 11, at least addressing a lot of the racial and um, social issues, like going around in the 1980s and what people are still facing to this day. And these are still shows, especially where A Different World is concerned, that I would argue is also like a must watch for any viewer who wants great television. And finally, we have the 1990s, more specifically like 1990 to, I believe, 1998, which was also the time when Robin Means Coleman published her book about Black situational comedy. She coined that particular era as the neo minstrelsy era because there was also the return of a lot of the Black American stereotypes that were from the minstrelsy era. You know, the you have the you have the very submissive toms, you have like the very loyal toms, and the jolly coons, and the very burly and brutish bucks. And you just basically have a lot of characters just inhabitant. And of course, when it comes to women, you have the sassy and angry black woman, the mammy figures, and basically a lot of these stereotypes that managed to make a crazy comeback, or let alone a mad comeback, especially with the proliferation of hip hop, R&B, and rap culture. Not to mention the presence that was going on with like a more urban feel, let alone a more urban ghettoized feel that was present in a lot of those black situational comedies. Like you need not look further than the likes of the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, In the House, Sister Sister to some extent, and 227, and what was that? Sparks. Yeah. Well, 227 and Moesha. So those particular shows also highlighted like the change that was going on, especially with Black American people, let alone young Black American people, getting into the whole hip hop, R&B, rap scene. And you also had characters doing a lot more dancing. You need not look further than one of the most notable dances done during the 1990s, which was the Carlton dance from the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, which debuted in season 2 in the second Christmas episode, Christmas Show. And I think that it was danced to the full in season three's Asses to Ashes. So throughout the entire run of Fresh Prince of Bel Air, the Carlton dance was a pop culture artifact, as I like to call it as well. And of course, it wasn't just Carlton's dance, but also Aunt Viv's dance in the season 2 episode, The Big 4-0. And let's also not forget about Soul Train. There were more characters dancing, so the presence of dance in 1990s sitcoms, well, especially sitcoms starring an all black cast, also does show that it did have its origins in the cakewalk from the 1900s. Now, the cakewalk was used to make fun of their white masters and their white ways of living. According to an article, an academic journal that I read that Kara Hagen wrote, she argued that Carlton's dance was the 90s equivalent of a cakewalk, in which Carlton does mock whiteness. And even though like the likes of Will, Jazz, and even Trey kind of mock Carlton for not being black enough, and even, you know, Carlton being called out, quote unquote, called out by Top Dog in season 4 for not being black enough in Blood is Thicker Than Mud. Carlton kind of shows that, yes, he's black and he's not going to wash it away anytime soon, but he can also use it to also mock certain white standards. You know, the interesting thing I found about the Carlton dance was that it's not just based on Courtney Love's dance in her in the Bruce one of Bruce Springsteen's videos, but also the white man dance done by Eddie Murphy. And what I also noticed about the Carlton dance was that it also drew upon inspirations from Gene Kelly's Singing in the Rain, and the and of course other many other pop culture, yeah, popular culture artifacts. I think I might have said it right here. That was, hold it. The Nicholas brothers from the 1943 film Stormy Weather. So, wow. That's great news, Ty. That's great news to hear, Ty. I'm really, really happy for you. But yeah, going back to that, the 1990s black sitcoms really had a lot of characters doing a lot more dancing, and that includes the Carlton dance. And let's also not forget that another influence of the Carlton dance was like another influence, as Kara Hagan argued, was also James Brown on stage singing "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag." So there was just a lot of both white and black influences that went into Carlton's trademark dance as a sort of 90s equivalent of a cakewalk. But yeah, the reason why Robin Armeens Coleman also criticized this period as being pretty regressive in her view was that there were more characters like moving around while they're talking, showing a lot more sass, all these quirks like finger snapping and loud, shrill voices, and trying to one up each other in volume and trying to outsass each other. And yeah, I could see why there is some contention with that period. But also, the 1990s brought into light the more pronounced racial and socioeconomic tensions occurring, like what happened at the Los Angeles riots of 1992, which was the result of what happened with Rodney King in 1991 being battered by four white police officers, and the four white police officers were eventually acquitted, thus causing a lot of uproar to occur in Los Angeles in 1992. It kind of got pretty crappy for television at the time because, well, it was kind of a very tough a very tough time for television to recover because not a lot of houses had cable, and well, there were also, and let me see right here. I think I might have been explicit about it in my research. Yeah. And of course, there was also the network decrease from a 67% share to 40 to 57%. Now, I'm kind of a virgin when it comes to knowing how percent shares work, although I've been watching network multiple times and I've gotten pretty used to the lingo of how television ratings work. But I will admit that I'm a little bit of a virgin when it comes to that. But at least what I've managed to get out from this research was that television, especially during the time of the the Rodney King incident as well as the LA riots of 1992, just kind of found itself in a very difficult position. However, at least with that period, at least there was a huge growth in black artists getting a lot more prominence, whether it's on television or film, like Brandy Norwood or Will Smith or what was Spike Lee and Belle Biv Belle Biv DeVoe, Boys to Men, and even Martin Lawrence. So there was a lot more Black American figureheads on film, on television, and in the music scene who were really growing more in prominence and were really starting to proliferate in the television landscape. So yes, Robin Means Coleman did criticize the 1990s as a sort of neo minstrelsy era. It was also, at least how I argued, a very socially relevant era that showed a lot more nuances in the black experience, and it wasn't just a question of whether you liked hip hop or you identified with hip hop or R&B or with like what was that, R&B and rap, but it was also kind of bringing in a lot more of the contentious sides of the black experience, and it's not just something that is always celebrated, but it's also something that also needs to be addressed in a more nuanced fashion. So that's what I managed to get out of my research of my particular topic thus far, especially when it comes to black sitcoms for each era. So I would say that the female Yugi Moto would win, bar none. I think because you can't underestimate you can't underestimate how formidable Yugi can be and how scary he can be if he has his dark side. Anyway, Tony, going back to the Spider-Verse films, well, I I definitely see where you're coming from, but I also kind of caught Fabio's epic rant on Spider-Man No Way Home, and it's a good thing I didn't catch it because I realized just how overrated it is, and I was at the time when, you know, films like that just didn't really grab me, and I was also still dealing with my bachelor's program. So you can imagine that trying to find time to watch something like this and form an opinion about it slipped my mind, and well, deservedly so. So don't worry, I'm not really holding the recent Spider-Man films or shading them. I'm just, saying what I think, and I just kind of prefer the older ones. So yeah, actually, going back to what you were saying, Goddess, so I do think that the female Yugi Muto would end up winning. And I do agree with you. The 1990s were definitely the best decade for film, for television shows, heck, even for anime, and to some extent video games, but more importantly for film, television shows, and anime. Especially when you have Fox Kids. Oh my god. I do miss those good old days of Fox Kids. It was sort of the block where you can kind of, you know, experiment with various forms of entertainment, especially when it comes to animation. Of course, let's also not forget that this was the very block that jettisoned the fame of the Power Rangers, more specifically Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It also did inspire some knockoffs like VR Troopers, as well as Superhuman Cyber Samurai Squad and Teenage Tattooed Heroes. Heck, even Big Bad Beetleborgs. But when it comes to Power Rangers knockoffs, I still argue that VR Troopers is a damn good show, and so is Big Bad Beetleborgs. I mean, interestingly enough, you will have realized that a couple of VR Troopers actors ended up finding themselves on Power Rangers, like Sarah Brown. She was Heather Thompson on the three-parter There's No Business Like Snow Business. It was kind of a shame that um was that Brad Hawkins didn't end up playing Trey of Triforia, because that would have been cool. Instead, we ended up getting the DiFilippo twins, which wasn't that bad at all, but it would have been cooler to have had, you know, Brad Hawkins voice both Trev Triforia and B Trev Triforia the same dang time. That would have been super duper cool. Not trying to shade the DeFilippo twins, but it would have been amazing to have had Brad Hawkins portray um, Trey. I know that there was a lot of talk occurring with Brad Hawkins originally being the new Sixth Ranger to replace Tommy, and kids just wanting Tommy back, and you know not going to school and starving from their meals in protest of wanting Tommy back. So by the time Fox and Saban, you know, um, heard the cries of their parents and their kids, they finally brought in Tommy back as the new White Ranger. And yeah, it's quite a fascinating, well, tale, as I like to call it, about when Jason David Frank came back, as Tommy in his new White Ranger tenure after being very well known as the Green Ranger. Yeah, very interesting times we lived, especially where Fox Kids is concerned. Shrek and A Nightmare Before Christmas. That sounds very interesting. I could actually see Shrek and Jack Skellington being very good buddies. I'd say that Shrek would be the straight man to Jack Skellington's more outlandish Cloud Cuckoo-lander. Thanks, TV tropes, for making me familiar with those particular tropes. I owe you one. Yeah. And going back to Fox Kids, it is kind of something when the last or one of the last hurrahs of Fox Kids was having Power Rangers Time Force air back in 2001, that deals with way more mature topics and challenged the Rangers a lot more, and had something that was a little bit more mature, quote unquote, with ripping friends, where it involves these big hulking superhero dudes. Yeah. And to me, it was like one of the last hurrahs of Fox Kids. Once 2002 rolled around, yeah, it ended up Power Chives, and Fox Kids was almost about to meet its end. Not to mention, with Power Rangers Wild Force, I will have this to argue. The thing about Power Rangers Wild Force is that it's still a decent season, but what kind of drowns it for me is some of the plot elements from Wild Force seem familiar. Like the main Rangers, you know, seem like they were from their Mighty Morphin counterparts. Well, at least in terms of color. Well, if you kind of switch um, Kimberly the Pink Ranger with Alyssa the White Ranger, although Alyssa is a little bit of a mixture of white and pink based on her clothing choices, civilian clothing choices, as well as her ranger outfit. Not to mention with Merrick, yes, his story is also shrouded in mystery as well as some tragedy. And at least he's not necessarily a Tommy clone, so I'll give him that. Um, but the whole environmental messages and the whole ecology messages that Power Rangers Wild Force possessed almost made me feel like I was watching a Power Rangers version of Captain Planet. it almost felt like we didn't need more ecology in Power Rangers. We ended up having a little bit of it in Mighty Morphin. Why have this again in Wild Force? But I get it. It was because of its original Super Sentai, Hakushu Sentai Gaurenja, in which it also dealt with environmental themes and also nature. So there were some parallels with it. And I know that with some of the characters, they also felt a little bit like their Mighty Morphin counterparts. Jindrex and Toxica, at least how I see it, and especially Toxica's and Jindrex's spells for the monsters to grow, they are essentially what would happen if you were to combine Bulk's and Skull's capabilities as a dynamic duo, let alone chemistry as a dynamic duo, with Rita Repulsa's and Rita Repulsa's sorcery and Tina's fighting abilities, all engendered in Toxica, and Finster's penchant for creating monsters, Babu's and Squat's henchmen, um, tendencies, and Goldar's warrior code, all engendered into Jindrex with a little bit of Rita Revolto engendering both Jindrex and Toxica. And with this hodgepodge, yeah, you get these two. Now, Master Org, I will admit that having him be a pure evil villain was definitely one of the best moves for Power Rangers Wild Force, and it did make him a lot more intimidating. Another, and of course, since we're also talking about ecology and Wild Force, the fact that Kite slash Animus, you know, reprimands the Rangers for taking advantage of their resources and not protecting the environment properly really does seem rather pretentious on his part. And it also feels like it's another, you know, issue that I've had with Wild Force with shoving down ecology and all this talk of environmentalism down our throats. But at least what saved Wild Force were at least a couple of aspects. First of all, there was the team up episodes. We're talking Reinforcements from the Future, parts 1 and 2, in which, yes, my number one favorite Power Rangers season of all time, Power Rangers Time Force, end up returning, especially to team up with the Wild Force Rangers. And not to mention, Rancic and, well, yes, Nadira ended up coming full circle with her transformation to the good side, but it's also Rancic who also ends up turning to the good side as well. So, really great ways to wrap up Rancic's and Nadira's stories and make them greater characters than they already are. And of course, I do consider Reinforcements from the Future to be, a swan song because this was one of the last episodes of Wild Force to air on Fox Kids before Wild Force ended up relocating to ABC Kids. And not to mention Forever Red. Now, talk about another team up that also serves as a reminder to see just how far Power Rangers has gone for nearly 9 to 10 years. Well, technically 10 years because it didn't it didn't seem it excuse me, let me reword that. Because it took it took Haim Saban 8 years for Power Rangers to get off the ground after his first couple attempts. And then somewhere between 1992 to 1993, He finally got it off the ground. And then with Forever Red, yes, it could have been a longer episode. Yes, it could have been a two-parter. But the fact that you get to see all of these iconic Red Rangers team up to defeat the Machine Empire and like defeat Serpentara once and for all. And yes, Cole ended up being the sole Red Ranger to do so, which was kind of, you know, out there in my opinion. You could have had all the Rangers just destroy Serpentera in one go as well, and not just have Cole do it, but all the Red Rangers. That would have been just as freaking cool. But even with that, it was kind of wonderful to see Forever Red in its glory. And not to mention the end of the Power Rangers, as in Wild Force's series finale. Now, it's kind of clear to see that this was yet the final swan song for the Saban era of the Power Rangers franchise. Like, this was the last American produced uh, episode, let alone season for Power Rangers, before the crew ended up moving to New Zealand and before the Disney era really kicked off with Ninja Storm. Well, it's not necessarily that, but it's just that I haven't really been into a lot of the oversaturated superhero films these days. Now, if I want my fair share of superhero entertainment, I would never go wrong with the television shows of the past. More ideally, the animated shows like Justice League, as well as Justice League Unlimited, Teen Titans 2003, X Men Evolution, and the 90s Spider Man cartoon, and, well, Static Shock. Yes, I can never, ever forget about Static Shock. That was golden right there. Not to mention, it also had one of Phil Lamar's best performances. I really love him as Virgil Hawkins from Static Shock. I also think that his performance as Basuli from The Legend of Tarzan is extremely underrated. Same goes for James Avery as Chief Kiwazi from that same series. Yeah. I also admire Kevin Michael Richardson as Moviro, also from Legend of Tarzan. Yep. Aside from me specializing in Inu Aya fan art, I still want to keep on going with my Four Jungle Brothers AU headcanon. I really want to keep on going with that so badly. Yeah. Because, well, I do consider George of the Jungle, Basuli, Tarzan, and Mowgli to be very tight jungle brothers, or should I say jungle muscle brothers. Yeah. That's another piece of work, or another series of works I still want to keep on doing on DeviantArt. Same goes for my beloved OT3 of all time, which is um, Hercules being in a romantically intimate relationship with, get this, Basuli and Tarzan. And of course, Namontak just being in a loving relationship with George of the Jungle, and Kokwon being in a loving relationship with Mowgli. Yep, those are my main pairings for my jungle brother AU headcanon. Like, you have two wild and two very close and loving brothers being in an intimate relationship with their favorite demigod in Hercules. Yeah, that's pretty fun. It was kind of like, my story with that, and I know that there are going to be some people might think that I'm having a bit of an agenda, but This was sort of based on a concept that I kind of had or kind of was inspired by. Now, I think based on my research about how ancient Greeks perceived intimacy, especially when it came to Sapphism for women and men being engaged in relationships, romantically intimate relationships of the same gender in ancient Greece, kind of also made me think about what if Hercules fell in love with not only Tarzan, but also Basuli, and what if both Basuli and Tarzan fell in love with Hercules? I think this kind of also made me affirm that you got two jungle warriors from Africa falling in love with a demigod from Greece who perceives both of them as not only wild and fierce, but also fiercely protective of him and intimately appreciative. And at first, I thought it would be nice just to have them be friends, but I thought, why not take it up a next level and have both Basuli and Tarzan admire Hercules as their lover and boyfriend? And I took it up a next level and had Hercules be their husband, especially having Hercules be, get this, both Basuli's and Tarzan's husband. That would be, that was absolutely out there, but it was fun for what it was worth. It's really fun. I do hope I could still manage to, you know, enjoy this. I would say that Kimba the White Lion would win Goddess, so he would really, unfortunately, devour her. Hush Puppies bread. I think I might have tried Hush Puppies a couple of times, but other than that, I haven't ventured in that much. I did try grits. Really nice. Really nice. Uh, the other the other piece of southern comfort food I tried, of course, you got mac and cheese, no doubt about that, and fried chicken. Yeah, hash browns I did try. Other than that, that was pretty much it. I have yet to try collard greens though. Although with cornbread, I did try a couple of times, and corn muffins as well. So there you go. In any case, and of course, going back to Shrek and Donkey versus Jack and Zero, well, I wouldn't say they're going to fight each other at all. I would say that they're going to be each other's very good friends and close confidants. Yeah. So that's another crossover friendship to find it very engaging. Absolutely engaging. Anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning into the stream. I cannot believe that I've managed to make it at over 2 hours and, well, 34 minutes. It's been very interesting having you guys on here and really fun because right now it's 1:04 a.m. here in Berlin. I will definitely have to keep on streaming a lot more often with you guys because I definitely love engaging with you, and it's also kind of therapeutic and really fun to really, really pour out everything that I've been thinking of and sharing it with you all. So until then, I wish you all a wonderful evening, a wonderful day, and a wonderful afternoon, no matter where you are, no matter where you're situated in. I hope you all stay amazing as possible. And I really want to thank you all so much for your support and for your really interesting opinions. It's been absolutely engaging, and I really hope that we can continue engaging with each other as possible or as much as possible. You guys are all awesome. And until then, take care. Oh, and finally, actually, Goddess Astro Boy would win against Luz Noceda. And once again, I thank you so much for your engagement. So, as I said, I wish you all a good night, a good afternoon, a good morning, and well, take care, everybody. And just remember, stay awesome.